What? Really?
Oh, does that mean we're going?
Hi, welcome to New Polity. We are doing a Christmas special.
Happy Christmas, everybody.
Do you tell your children that Santa Claus is real, Andrew?
Santa Claus is real.
Okay, well, there you go.
Oh.
I was asked this recently, like, do you lie to your child about Santa Claus? And I was sort of caught off guard because I'm like already lying to him about Green Lantern, so it just seems like additional. Like, oh yeah, no, Santa Claus is just the surface.
My kids think it's ridiculous when someone suggests that he's not real because he's just Saint Nicholas. And what do you mean Saint Nicholas isn't real?
I see.
They think it's like an outrageous accusation.
Like what? You do not
and
think
it's what? Yeah, Saint Nicholas is real. He's in heaven. He's looking at you right now, saying he's not real.
Like the Virgin Mary. Like you're really gonna call her fake.
It's like, oh yeah, I guess he is real. It's like, yeah, so don't say things like that.
And then they punch you, and then
it's like, what? What do you mean he's not real?
Some people try and make the distinction between like the commercialized, capitalized.
Yeah, but you see, here's
Santa.
You want to know my take on that?
I do. Yeah.
Is that
That's why I was bringing it up,
is that
actually.
people are. They're trying to be like, oh, look how we resist the world and do this, but actually they're betraying their worldliness, because it's like that whatever world they're living in is dominated by the commercial Santa, and so now they feel like they have to counter that somehow. But it's like that's because you're too in the world. If you're outside of the world, Santa isn't the commercial Santa. Your kids don't even know about the commercial Santa,
Right.
and so it's like Santa is who you tell them he is, and it's Saint Nicholas. And there's no, like, you don't have to lie. You don't have to do anything because they don't, it's not like they're being dominated by Coca-Cola Santa. You know, they don't even.
So,
the
real answer is just blow up your TV, not like redefine Santa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not, it's like, yeah. You get yourself, it's like you have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. That's the reason why you feel like you have to lie. Get both feet out, then you don't have to lie. That's my take on it.
That's good. Well, that's what we're doing here today is warm and gingerbread tasting takes on Christmas.
Yep. Take both feet out.
Yep.
So
why I'm wearing the hat.
Yeah. I'm glad you don't shake your head.
Well, but it's an audio. It's a hat that's friendly for the people listening on the podcast and the video because it's got these little jingle bells.
It's like NPR. You know, you get some really slow talking people.
The people who can't see you do that right there are really missing out. Do it again, would you?
All right. Anyways, to business. Jeez.
Well, should we talk about the Bible?
Oh yeah.
We don't have to.
No, it's
fine.
All right.
Let's do it. I mean, this is like the most wonderful time of the year. And Charlie Brown, the true meaning of Christmas, is in the Bible.
What does Charlie Brown say? I actually don't know.
What? You don't?
My
know
kids
what I'm
watch
talking about?
Charlie Brown.
It's this whole. Oh
no.
man.
Oh no.
It's like, it's a great setup because it's this big like yearly Christmas movie that everyone watches, and it's looking for the true meaning of Christmas, and where pretty much every movie you watch that looks for the true meaning of Christmas doesn't find it. They just pretend they do and are like, it's in giving and friends.
Or
and it's like, no, that's like every day.
Believing, just generically believing, so you'll hear the bells ringing.
Yeah. Just belief.
Just belief. Like belief in what? Just you have to believe.
Belief in the sovereignty of Hitler.
Could be
one thing.
You just have to believe in the spirit of Christmas. That is the spirit. That, like, the meaning of Christmas is to believe in the meaning of Christmas.
I know exactly. That becomes the But the point is
Wow.
that you get sort of, you know, it's a genius little animation, but you're getting all prepped for something lame like that, and then they just it's like somewhere at the end, what's the true meaning of Christmas, and then they just start reading the Bible.
Yeah,
I think the narrative from Luke. I think it's
which is
cool.
the kind of awesome early '60s post-war America where you could still pull that stuff off.
The last gasp, man.
Yeah,
that's cool. I did see this is actually just further evidence of the fact, because have you read the comics in the newspaper recently? Do you get a newspaper?
I do.
Syndicated comics, like there's the
I don't. My kids would be able to talk to you about that.
Okay. Anyways, there's this really awful one.
Because only his kids read the newspaper.
No, the comics. No. I'm busy with the business section.
Yeah. Rising and grinding, baby.
The point is there's some continued Christian efforts there. That's all. We should move on. In Family Circus. You don't read Family Circus. It's incredible.
I remember it from...
Your family is a circus.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Anyways.
That's a fact.
Well, I'm looking forward to your kids' Christmas pageant this year, Andrew.
Oh, I know they've been practicing it. It's very funny, it's comedic.
Oh man,
it has
Yeah,
to
it's
be,
not
yeah.
serious. It's slapstick.
If it was serious, it would probably still be comedic.
So imagine 4 boys between the ages of 6 and 12
Yeah.
as like the backbone of it. Okay. And they're writing it themselves. So you can imagine the kind of like a lot of falling down, a lot of people getting hit with things,
Right.
you know.
the
That's
donkey
great.
not going.
Yeah,
things-
it's very
that was-
funny. It's very funny.
That's good.
I mean, if you're in the right mindset, you have to put yourself in the place. Yeah. It's not sophisticated, is what I'm saying.
What do they do about the God Kings? What are they going to do? Have they done it? I can't.
Yeah, is there a Herod? Does a Herod
Yeah.
show up?
There is Herod, yeah. Yeah, he's always and last year Herod was obsessed with COVID. So like the magi show up and he's like masked. Herod is all masked up and like with screens and like all worried about whether or not they've taken the proper precautions
Well, I mean,
and they're
from out-
obeying the protocols.
From out there in the east. I mean, who
Yeah,
knows?
right. They're dirty, probably. They have germs on them, right? So, like, yeah, that was the way they did Herod was that he was like a left coast, like West Coast, COVID believer,
Wow,
like faithful. Yeah,
that's just creepily accurate.
I know,
you
it's
I'm sure it was not your influence in the house.
no.
Yeah. These kids. These
what would they
kids
come
these
up with
days.
next?
Oh, these crazy kids.
Well, I mean, it is kind of strange though, just generally that both Luke and Matthew have like God Kings at the very beginning,
Absolutely.
but different ones.
Well, it's
You know?
not strange if you've been listening to us.
Well, that's true. And who's going to listen to us
Right.
during Christmas
That's a good
except for
point.
everybody that's
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
listening to
I
us,
think
so-
I think that one thing is that we're so because we're such a Christian culture and we read the Bible so much and it's so penetrated our like just way of speaking and thinking that we forget or we just like almost automatically explain these references away like they're just sort of spiritualized
Yeah.
word games.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so like when you have in Luke, when you have the angel to Mary, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, and he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Right? This isn't like, oh yeah, but we're talking about like the kingdom of your heart.
You know, it's funny.
Right? Or something like
We're in the middle of this novena right now, and when they cite Christ saying that the kingdom of God is among you, they literally then put in parentheses
Oh no.
in your heart.
Yeah.
They literally did
Not that kind of kingdom. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Herod. You're fine.
Yeah.
Like that kind of
No, I mean, it's true that I don't know what else we mean when we talk about, God entering human history. If we don't actually mean human history, it's like he entered human history, which means our language, which means what we mean when we say king and what we mean when we say kingdom and what
Right.
actually is present when we're talking about Jacob, like who is a person.
Yeah.
And then we're like, yeah, but not really.
But not really. Yeah.
Yeah, it's but obviously we're here to say the opposite. It is in fact the establishment of a kingdom of genuine peace, which is why I think you're driving at this, that it's no accident that not only is Christ, not only does he come as king, but he comes in opposition to kings, right? Because he's born escaping the murderous intent of a Herod, and he's born under the census of Caesar, right? So he's sort of, I think C.S. Lewis talked about Christ as a paratrooper that goes behind enemy lines during the night. And I think there's if you add that he's also a rival king and going behind enemy lines at night, you pretty much got it. That he begins his combat as a baby against the kings of this earth, who always tend towards creating idolatrous slave states.
Right.
That's what Christmas is all about.
Absolutely.
There was
Charlie Brown.
It's about slave states, dude.
Slave states. Get with it. You want to see a Christmas pageant? I'll show you a Christmas pageant. No, but it's true, right? I mean, like most Christmas pageants don't include like the slaughter of the innocents or something, but it seems
Yeah.
to be as much a part of the narrative.
Well, there's
as
this.
anything
Then
else.
there's the theology. So this is what when God enters history, he enters, like you said, he enters into actual history, and so he takes the theology, the ideas that are there, the structures that are there,
Yeah.
and then turns them on their head or redirects them in a way, because they're not totally depraved. They're always capable.
Yeah.
They're always capable of bearing the truth if they're
Yeah.
just tweaked the right way, right? So you have, for example, the magi coming and going, we saw his star rising, the king of the Jews. They referred to him as the king of the Jews. And then we want to go worship him. And then Herod's response is,
Yeah.
where is he going to be? And then his like scholars tell him, cite to him the passage about how the king is going to come from Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And then he says to the magi, go find him so I can come worship him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's important that we understand. It's like we want to say, oh, but that's because he's God. And so they worship him because you worship. And it's like, well, sort of, that's right. But the point is that to these guys, kings are gods.
Yeah.
Right. To these guys are and
Yeah,
so,
it was totally comprehensible to go to someone and be like, "Hey, where's the king?
I want to worship him."
Yeah.
That wasn't like, what? Why would you worship a king? You must be talking about the son of the Messiah, like the Son of God in the sort of incarnational sense.
Yeah.
Like that's not what they're thinking at all. And the point is that the true Son of God can enter right into that political theology,
Yeah.
and render it moot by making it true.
Yeah.
Right.
awesome.
So it's like, now when you worship this king, this boy king,
Mm-hmm.
it is in fact God. Right. So you're like, he's rendering your that impulse towards that idolatry, not idolatry.
Yeah, and then when we talk about it being merciful, that's what we mean. That it's not just like,
He becomes a baby.
right.
I mean, the most humble of men to save us from our folly. Right.
And he doesn't require of us or rather he does, but he is the causal agent in our conversion, right? Because he doesn't just say, well, I mean, it's similar with him giving the law. He doesn't say, okay, once you fully understand, then I'll come so you can worship me properly.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, no, you are enslaved. You're worshiping men. That original sin of desiring to be like God has really played out to a maximum level, in which men really are being worshipped as God. And I'm going to exchange the object of your idolatry for the true God. It's very similar to the law. I mean, we talk about Jesus as the law of God.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we do anyways. And it's very similar, right? Like, it wasn't that God was saying, well, you guys are so good and so capable that I can give you my divine law. It was that, oh, you guys are already obeying tyrannical laws. You guys are already in structures in which you're obeying laws that come from kings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you a law.
I'll be your king.
And so you don't actually have to change your fundamental mode. Rather, it's the humility of God
To enter into the mode.
causes the dynamic difference. Like, now we're doing something entirely different. And it's I mean, we talk about the primacy of grace. I mean, I can't think of any other or a better place to put it. Like, the primacy of grace is that we don't change. God changes for us, and then we change as a result. It's like, now we're obeying a law that comes from God, so we're becoming more and more godlike. When it wasn't because we deserved it or did something that we're ready for this law. In the same way, we were worshiping kings, we were enslaved to idols and demons, and then God had the humility to become the object of our worship without us yet changing our hearts. He began to change our hearts.
Yeah, that's the way grace is. Grace comes to us.
Comes first.
I want to read this real quick. This is just to kind of exemplify what you guys are saying. This is an old inscription in the marketplace of Priene in Turkey.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Of course, this one.
They
Yeah,
had,
yeah.
great dates.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Wow. Extraordinarily. Does anybody listen? Hey, Dave, can you get us some dates? So this comes from the marketplace there, the place of the great dates. And it's written specifically by the high priests of that time, Apollonius of Menophilus Azonetus.
So it's
Say
a
that 10 times, please.
Jewish high priest in Turkey.
No.
Oh, sorry.
This is a Roman high priest.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
and
This is like a Roman outpost.
Particularly, it is.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And then it's particularly talking about like the appearance of Caesar. He says, since Providence, which has ordered all things and is deeply interested in our life, has set in most perfect order by giving us Augustus, whom she filled with virtue that he might benefit humankind, sending him as a savior, both for us and for our descendants, that he might end war and arrange all things. And since he, Caesar, by his appearance, excelled even our anticipations, surpassing all previous benefactors, and not even leaving to posterity any hope of surpassing what he has done. And since the birthday of the god Augustus was the beginning of the good tidings for the world that came by reason of him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just think about all of these kind of Christological correspondence in this. I mean, we have him as the savior. He's the one that ends all war. He's a bearer of peace. He's the prince of peace.
Right. He has a big birthday.
He has a big birthday. He's the benefactor also, which
Yeah.
Christ obviously often, we often bring up that Christ calls the kings of the earth.
But it's not that
benefactors.
this is Christological. It's
No.
that it's that Christ is imperial.
Exactly. And so he is coming,
Awesome.
as you were just saying, comes into this context.
Right.
He's recognizable within this context, and then he changes it
Mhm.
completely. And I'll just kind of read one other thing.
It's so daring. I mean, I really think there's another. Well, you read one other thing. I'm going to cross my fingers. I do this when I have to remember something. I cross my
that work?
fingers.
Do you remember what you have to remember?
Yeah,
Do
usually.
you want to just say it?
Sure. There's it's the East, or not East, the Christmas antiphon's not the right word. It's like before the Mass. No, it's like, anyways, there's a traditional chant that we're doing at St. Peter's. Shout out to another Jacob who's actually doing it. But it's this long chant that's basically narrowing in on the precise time when Jesus was born.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
starts in this broad,
Yep.
like
I'm familiar with
during the reign of whoever. And I
Yeah.
forget all of it except for the end where it says under Augustus, when all the world was at peace.
Right.
Right.
Then Jesus comes. And I think this is difficult in some ways because there's two ways of maybe looking at this, right? And it really defines two different political theologies, or at least two different directions within political theology. On the one hand, you can say that Christ came when all the world was at peace through the Roman Empire, which is what's meant, and that's what was meant in that inscription, right? That he establishes a peace. And you can say that, well, Christ is that is preparation for Christ precisely because that is most like unto Christ, that he is the true Prince of Peace. So when we approximate worldly peace sort of close enough, then Christ, it's a natural setting, as it were. I mean, insofar as you can have a natural setting for
You got a sort of
supernatural.
two-tier
Yeah.
schema here.
Yeah, exactly. Like nature's been perfected
Up to a certain level, and then supernatural will take over from there.
Well, no, but it's really quite. I mean, people really do say this, like
Right, I know.
well, we go through all the wisdom of the Greeks and
Yeah.
and Aristotle and Plato, and that gets us only so far, and
Nice,
then by
neat-
grace we
nice,
get
neat nature grace dichotomy.
Right.
Okay.
or that's always showing our cards.
Yeah.
Or the other direction in political theology is to say, with Christ, that there are two kinds of peace. I mean, Christ says this later, right? That he comes to bring peace, but not as the world brings. And that the peace established by Caesar, by Augustus, is it is a certain perfection, as it were, or like maximization of what kind of peace the world can bring, but it is the peace that comes from domination. It is the peace of a successful empire of slaves.
St. Augustine.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Oh yeah,
St.
that
Augustine,
guy. Yeah.
who has the
Love
answer
his
to
work.
most questions, by the way. He talks about the peace of the empire, and the way, one of the ways he talks about it is with language, which is opening a big can of worms. But the setting is that human beings are linguistic, and that we talk to each other, and a foreigner, someone who we can't talk to, is someone who's close to us, that we'd rather hang out with our dog, is what he says, than hang out with someone whose speech we can't understand. And what he's talking about is the way human peace is established through discourse, like that we can share something. And then he talks about the empire, and he's like, now, so how is it that the empire is established, and he says, well, the empire has managed to spread one language. He's talking about Latin, one language over the entire empire, and and through that has established a sort of peace.
Right.
And then he says, but through such slaughter and bloodshed and domination was that accomplished.
Right.
Right? Like that, it's like, yeah, there is a sort of peace that's a sort of mimic of the way we really are at peace, which is by talking to each other, but only through war.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Orosius, you know, his one of his students, one of St. Augustine's students, tried to carry on the city of God.
Yeah,
or kind of rewrites certain parts of it and such. And he actually brings up the reign of Augustus as this reign of peace. And he particularly says that Christ wanted to approve his reign and thus came in the middle of it, which is a really strange idea.
Boo.
Yeah.
Well, one way that the fathers come up with to talk about this sometimes is that there's a functional convenience to the worldly peace.
No, I think that's what he's actually saying.
Yeah, because it allows the gospel to spread.
Yay.
And that's and he says he approves it insofar as it's the first time in history where disciples, apostles, could actually cross borders and bring the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Right. But this is precisely what we're saying is the undermining of Christmas. Like it uses the piece of Babylon, the piece of Caesar, but turns it on its head and
doesn't endorse
changes
it.
its ends. Yeah, it's like you know, and you can see this all the time. Like it's actually a theme throughout the Old Testament that I don't think it's spoken of too much. That there's a line that says, I think it's in Proverbs, but I'm probably wrong. But it says that the wicked amass for the sake of the just. It's very confusing at first because the wicked amass for the sake of themselves. They're the ones taking all the property. They're the ones ruling for private gain. But there's this hope in God's providence that such material amassments, insofar as they are amassed, now become very vulnerable to being turned over by the Lord or being turned over to the people of God, right? So you can imagine this in some ways like, you know, well, you can just imagine this, right?
Yeah,
There's this
it's
kind
like
of
the
greedy
spoils.
taking up, and
The
then
spoils.
the spoils are there. So you think of Egypt, right?
Yeah, right.
The Israelites go and they just spoil all of Egypt. And it seems in the same way that there is a building up and amassing of material peace, of material language, of material empire, geographical unity, that sort of thing, that then goes to the victor.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to see the historical coincidence here, because I think a lot of times in our general historical ignorance, right, we imagine, okay, Christ is being born, he's being incarnate into the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, not really. I mean, Augustus is the first one. Right, like this is the beginning of the Roman Empire as an imperial order. So the Republic has built this empire, and it transitions. But Augustus is really the first of the god emperors, right? So we're gonna, from here on out, we're going to have a divinity in the imperial throne.
Oh, whereas like with Julius Caesar, it was kind of a retroactive.
It becomes retroactive,
God.
And it becomes, he's a dictator. He has these sort of pseudo constitutional functions. Right. It's exactly at the same time that Christ is born that the divine emperors are established.
Oh wow!
In the empire.
Yeah.
Right. So you have this rivalry from the very beginning.
Wow.
Right? Like this established and so it's not, and then through the course of Roman history, what you're going to get is that the traditional polytheistic paganism is slowly over the first few hundred years subordinated to a monotheistic worship of the emperor.
Right.
By culminating in sort of Diocletian. So you have, and then at the same time Christianity is spreading. So what I'm getting at is you have these sort of two diametrically opposed but very profoundly united sort of solutions to the human problem going on simultaneously in the empire. You know,
wow,
it's very interesting.
Amazing. And that's actually that inscription that I read is part of the propaganda to go along with it. This is 9 BC. You know, some scholars think that Christ was actually born that year. It's just also pretty funny, or at least around that time period.
Right.
But that's a great point. I'll read this other thing real quick, and this I think goes to the point of Christ coming in the same place as Augustus,
Mm-hmm.
and as a king, acting as a king completely differently. So this is from the Venerable Bede. So this shows us in the traditions. It's not just us. Here we go. Augustus peacefully reigned 12 years around the birth of Christ, so that the prophecy would be fulfilled to the letter. They would beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation. It's Isaiah 2. Christ desired to be born in the most peaceful time because he greatly sought and loved peace, for he watches over the lovers of peace. He desired that the disciples, whom he was going to send out preaching, to be able to travel and be secure anywhere and be protected under the formidable shadow of the Roman name by the imminent sedition of impending treacheries. So it kind of seems positive so far. But then Venerable Bede goes on. He says, when the Lord was going to be born, the world was to be taxed, because he was appearing in the flesh, who was consecrating his elect for all eternity, in whom the name of Augustus is truly fulfilled, who is capable to increase his own people, that man instructed them to distinguish themselves not by a public census of their money, but by their oblation of faith. With the old census of the synagogue being destroyed, the new census of the church was being prepared, which does not drive out torment, but relieves it, and does not demand a coin, but a stamp of faith.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's-
so it's a different activity making use of idolatry, it seems to me.
Right, but it doesn't leave it alone, nor does it build something next to it.
Mm.
It replaces it. Like the
Yeah.
kingship of Christ is a true kingship, meaning like when you accept it, we don't need another king. Like there's no long, I mean, not in the pagan sense of a king. Now the Christian kings won't be kings, right? It's like that's the weird thing about it is I think that we start equivocating on the word king, or at least it becomes analogical, right?
Mm.
Where like you refer to the anointed medieval kings as kings, or even the Christian emperors, even Constantine or Theodosius as kings,
Right.
but they're not kings like the way the pagan kings were.
Mm.
They're not now. They're mediators of the kingship of Christ, right? Like their kingship is now beneath the kingship of the truth, which they don't control. Right. The order of the cosmos itself, the order of true and false, just and unjust, is not there. Does not derive it. It does not derive its power from them. Well, that's missing an essential component of pre-Christian kingship.
Right. Well, and some of the medievals were aware of this.
Yeah,
I mean, they even say that the word kingship is a little bit hit or miss, because true kingship was seen through the book of Judges. Interventionary action of someone atop the hierarchy, only breaking into the lower levels of subsidiarity when it's necessary.
Right.
And that Samuel was like the last guy to be a true king. And after that, it was, there was a strong attempt to hold on to it, but it was kind of lost.
Yeah, but it's that the kings, the Christian kings become Davidic but in that sort of way, like the law, David enforces the law, but does not make the law, right?
Right.
And that's not the same as the kings of the nations, who are the source of law.
Right. Yeah. An emergence from
and this
them.
is also, I mean, a fulfillment of a revolution in kingship that begins in the Old Testament. It's just rarely achieved. So we talk about how the New Testament, well, what's different from the New and the Old? Well, in part, it's that the New, because it brings Christ, brings the ability to fulfill the Old, to make efficacious what's in the Old, but it doesn't mean that it's not in the Old. So what I mean is, like, you have in the Wisdom of Solomon, you have words that are spoken against every pagan conception of kingship that I've come across in that for that time. For no king has had a different beginning of existence. There is for all mankind one entrance into life and a common departure. And then the king is said to be under wisdom as his bride. He's
Right.
married to wisdom, which is the law of Moses, and he has to be obedient to the law of Moses. I mean, that's just a different conception of kingship.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ can fulfill it in his perfect obedience to the Father while also being something, obviously, more.
Well, I want to ask along these lines about the wise men. Like, why do you think that the wise men show up right at the beginning of Matthew's birth account?
Well, I mean, one thing would be that the epiphany to the nations goes right along with what we've been talking about. That the epiphany to the nations is in the mode of the nations, right? I mean, like, they're astrologers. A star has risen. A king is born, right? Like, and they're going to go worship him. And I think that there's a real profundity to that, right? It's not everything that you know, everything that you are is wrong. It's that I'm capable of showing you myself in your world, right? The world of the nations. I mean, that would be, I mean, that's the way I've read that historically. You know, when I read it, it's like, oh, this is him saying, I am a king. You're not wrong to come worship me as a king.
But I do think, I mean, again, we have such a cultural baggage, and for good reasons, but I think the kind of understanding that the wise men were probably shocked to find him in a manger
I think that's probably true.
is probably true.
Yeah.
Because it's not simply, it is an entering into our world, and then it's also a breaking it. You know, our world is being broken because our world is built up in structures of sin that have to be destroyed, and so one of those structures is, and maybe just the ordering structure is the worship of men.
Well, I do think he was in a house at that point.
Oh, is he? Oh, right, for Epiphany, that's true.
Yeah.
But even so,
But
I'm saying
he's a
that
poor
our
baby.
our
He's a poor
feeling
baby.
about
Exactly.
it is
The point-
correct.
I like it
The
better.
point is that
I
they
like
don't.
it better when the wise men are at the stable.
Yeah.
Me too.
Sorry to ruin it.
Don't do
Just
that.
saying that the Bible says it. The Bible says it right here. You know, they saw him in the house that he was. So, anyways,
Well, I think one other part is the flight into Egypt, because it always references, well, this fulfills the prophecy, out of Egypt I have called my son. The references to 1 Kings in the flight of Jeroboam from Solomon after Solomon apostatizes. So if you go back to the story of Solomon, it's that you have a king who is supposed to be different, who is supposed to be not like unto the nations, but following the law of Moses, and he begins to go after foreign gods and utilize slave labor, and it becomes dubious that he's on the right path. And then by the end, God declares that no, he's not on the right path. He's trying to be a king like the nations, and so there is a Jeroboam rises up as a rival, and he's taken away to Egypt where he's safe. So it's not just. So sometimes I think we hear these like fulfillment of the prophecies as if it's just like, well, this sentence was said, and so we have to make it fit over here. So, you know, we just brought Jesus to Egypt for a little bit. But it seems like he is once again showing us that he opposes the kingship of this earth with the kingship of heaven. And his going to Egypt is teaching us that.
That's fascinating. I think that the idea of prophecy as being pedagogical or teaching is an interesting one, and so I have a thought on this that often when people ask why did the Old Testament happen, right? Why did we have this huge long period and all of this occur? And you get the story. Normally, it's like, oh, it's some sort of preparation for the coming of Christ, right? And I think that sometimes that's not wrong, but I wonder if there's a way of understanding it in a slightly different way, which is that when we talk about Christ entering into history, like God enters into history, he really enters into history and becomes a man with a biography, a historical biography, like a man, like the way we are men, like we are in a time and a place in history. Like that's what part of what it means to be a man. That when Christ is incarnate and becomes a man, he becomes a man like that, fully in a culture, in a world, in a place that has a history. And so it's not I guess what I'm trying to get at is that that long preparation is not just so that the Jews themselves or Israelite themselves are prepared to accept Christ, right? Because first of all, it doesn't quite work that way.
No.
Right. But more
No, so I'm just trying to build it up. Most people ask the question, why is it that God had to design the nation of Israel? And
yeah,
the
why do we have it?
And the answer that is often given is, well, because they needed to be able to recognize the Messiah when he came. So they have to give all the forms and structure.
Be prepared to receive him. And that's not wrong, but I want to turn it around a little bit and say that
the opposite is true too.
They needed to be prepared to be the nation that Christ could be born into, to reveal God to the world and reveal himself as a king, right? So he's born as a baby so that he can be educated, so that he can develop as a man in this nation that has this history, so that when he preaches the truth, he can preach it in the mode of that nation. And that is a mode that has been prepared,
right?
Has been prepared through centuries of history to be intelligible to the nations.
Yeah. So you see what he
came
as a baby, grew up so that he almost could get lost in the temple, to know
the point.
Mores,
I mean, one way of sort of a shorthand of all this would be that the reason why we have the Old Testament is so that Christ can have Mary, right? Like so that he can be born of a Hebrew woman who is a part of that culture, who then raises him in it, so that when he preaches the truth, when he preaches the kingship of Christ to us, it's with all of that language, all that cultural idiom, all that history.
It does make a lot of sense out of the Old Testament, because it seems like again and again the Old Testament is always taking a form of the nations of the world, especially the power structures of the world, and then just changing it a little bit, or like in a very significant way, while retaining its exterior form. So it's like, well, the nations have kings, you're going to have kings like this. The nations have priests, you're going to have priests like this. The nations have sacrifice, you're going to have sacrifice like this. The nations have idols, you can't do that, but you can have
a temple,
a temple without an idol.
Yeah, right.
Or the nations have armies, you can't have standing armies. You have to have this. Again and again, everything we think of as like, well, describe the human world. What's it built up of? Everything that we would say, well, it's got governance and kings and armies and all markets and money and blah blah blah. Everything that we would say, the Old Testament deals with, and then through law creates this difference, right? So what I'm saying is this makes sense then, that what you're talking about, that it was preparing for a boy to be raised into that, and then to be able to speak a language that is still comprehensible to all and I think just barely comprehensible, right?
Yeah, right. But
like
just
it's teetering, on the edge, right? Because
right?
at some point you might say, well, that's not a king. Like I know kings.
Right,
you're doing something weird. I just want to go to war with you. I don't want to listen to you. Right?
Yeah.
But
Pontius Pilate at the end.
Yeah, right, right. So it's not to say it's a perfectly comprehensible. The whole point is that it's just comprehensible enough to be an opportunity
to make conversion
to
possible.
convert. And so Jesus is born speaking a language that is fundamentally Jewish, and because of that, fundamentally comprehensible to the nations, while being pushed to the very edge of comprehensibility with the work that God wants to do with that human world. So,
but one of the things I find attractive about this is that we don't then, because there's a tendency to view the Old Testament as like a series of failures, where it's like, oh, well, we'll try this. Oh, that didn't work. Now we'll try something else. Oh, that doesn't work. Now we'll try something else. Oh, that doesn't work. And then eventually you get to the point of, well, I guess we better send Jesus, like at the end. And there is that narrative in there, right? Like that there's that narrative in there, but that
even the parable
that itself is pedagogical. I mean, like the failures are a part of the forming of the people. So like if you look at the book of Judges, there's really the recapitulation of the Passover story, right? Like what I mean is that you're enslaved, and part of your slavery is the result of your own sins. You reach sort of rock bottom, you cry out for help, a savior is sent, you're redeemed into righteousness, then you do it again, then you do it again, then you do this cycle over and over and over again. And like and then those cycles happen on bigger levels of scale and the bigger plot lines within the Old Testament, right? Not just, there's like the micro plot lines and the bigger cycles. But what's happening there
Wouldn't it just be easier to go to
is
confession?
but don't you think that what's happening is the formation of a culture within which that is their meta narrative?
Yeah.
Like the way they view the world is through these sort of cycles, and that is then the world that Christ can come into and preach the final act here.
Yeah.
And it's like it's intelligible, right?
Mhm.
Like the language is there, the culture is there to receive it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that that they've ascended to a almost level of perfection, and then the final sort of descent of God comes to get them the rest of the way.
Yeah.
It's exactly that it doesn't matter how long it goes on, they never get past that cycle. You know, it's exactly that that is preparing them for Christ, who redoes the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
You
It's not
think
the
about
finishing touch.
think about all the. I mean, that makes a lot of sense out of especially the beginning of the narratives of Jesus' ministry, where everyone's trying to figure out who he is.
Yeah,
Like, is he a prophet? Is he John the Baptist? Is he?
How do we fit him in this story?
But it's precisely that. Like, what's amazing about that is not so much that. What's amazing about that is that they knew that they had to fit him into one of the categories.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Are you a prophet that's preaching for us to reform
Yeah.
before we fall into slavery? No,
Yeah.
you're not. Then what are you in the story? Are you?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
you're right. Are you David?
Yeah. So then it becomes like, no, I'm the end of it all.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
which is awesome.
There does seem to be. I mean, before we turned on the cameras, you were talking about the death of Herod. You know, there does seem to be like a real, like movement against we are defeating God kings now instead of letting them lord it over us. God just kind of interventionarily kills them off. So just like just to hit this real quick, like Herod goes off to Tyre and on an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, and made an oration. And the people shouted, "The voice of a god and not a man!" And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him
Boom.
because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died.
Eaten by worms.
Sucks.
Yeah, it
I hope
does.
Herod is in heaven. Like, I hope the experience of
Being
being
eaten.
by worms was sufficient purgation for him. But you know what's amazing about that is if that story was about a Jewish king, we would barely blink, right? Like, if the whole story was like a Jewish king gives an oration, everyone says he's a god. I mean, and in some ways this, well, it happened with Nebuchadnezzar, who's not Jewish, but within that context, we know what that's like, right? Well, but what's amazing is now that Christ has come, it's a pagan king being punished for idolatry
Right.
by an angel of the Lord. I mean, isn't
Right.
that fascinating? That
Yeah.
that now the and I'm not saying that I think it's a teaching moment. You know, I'm not saying that this is now like a mechanical law that wherever there's idolatry, there'll be an immediate worm attack by the Lord.
That'd be nice, actually.
Watch
That'd be
out by.
sweet.
Sorry,
If that's how we could identify idolatry,
Yeah.
is like wherever the worms are.
Yeah, saints are incorrupt and idol worshippers get eaten by worms.
That'd be
But then we might not like it if like our friends. I don't know. It's just, gotta leave room for conversion, tares within the wheat, and all that. But it does seem like the message there, as the kind of final act of the Herods, is the death of a would-be God king by an angel of the Lord. That you also have the new yoke that Christ is putting on the shoulders of the nations now, right? So up till Christ, it's been Israel who alone is to be the ones who rule not for private gain, not in and through idolatry, but for the sake of the weak. And now you can see how in the gospel, as it spreads, this is now the imperative for all the nations. So they all live under that great risk of the gospel. They all live exposed. Girard talks about this, that like once you have Christ, you live in a much riskier world, a world that is necessarily tending towards apocalypse, because any that kind of peace in which we believe that the world is essentially comes forth from the hand of a king, of a man, of men, is no longer possible to us. So we can't establish peace in any other way now but conversion.
You're so vulnerable.
Yeah, extremely, because when you do it nakedly.
Yeah.
When you say, okay, I'm going to establish a new peace in my name, right? You have to, sometimes I don't think we can fathom like the real change that must have happened, that like that was, to hear that was a moment of getting rid of our fear and anxiety
Right,
to some
no,
extent,
yeah,
to say,
exactly.
oh, like there's a God among men and he is going to dominate the world and we'll live within that peaceful world. That now with the coming of Christ, it's like that's always exposed as wrong and idolatrous, which means that there's no human solution anymore.
Mhm.
Like it's just conversion or apocalypse. That's sort of the
Yeah.
the
And that's what you
options.
find with these two kings mentioned at the beginning of the two Gospels. What's the Herod and Caesar? It's death on the one hand and conversion on the other.
Oh yeah.
That's
In
right.
the lines, that's cool. I like that.
To your point.
Yeah. Why do you think the angels announced the birth of Jesus to shepherds? I just have wondered about this because I think I've definitely heard, and this comes from the medieval tradition. Well, they're like the rustics.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
they-
The uneducated
Uneducated.
bumpkins.
But it's like, well, but there are a lot of uneducated bumpkins that were doing other things. You know, like ditch diggers.
Don't you think that the I mean, I'm just speaking off the top of my head, but the whole shepherding the sheep component to it has got to be something. These are people who care for devote their life to caring for very, very stupid animals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I mean, maybe there's something to it, that there's something. I mean, shepherds turn up a lot in mythology as being a sort of ideal type,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Not just in Christian and Jewish mythology. I
Oh,
mean, think
really?
about David. Isn't he out carrying the herds?
But are there other examples?
Oh
outside
yeah,
of-
yeah. I think in pagan mythology and stuff, there's a sort of idealization of the shepherd,
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
because he's out, he's by himself.
Or
So
just
there's this
stuff like
idea
that,
that he's
yeah.
sort of contemplative. He's
Right.
caring for animals. You know, I mean, there's a
He is also self-sufficient. for
there's
the
a
most part, yeah.
romanticism to the shepherd, I think, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
know.
you see throughout the Old Testament that one of the ways that God distinguishes the kinds of king or the work he's doing with kingship is to raise shepherds to be kings. So with David, it's
Yeah.
not it's not incidental that he's a shepherd. I mean, he says this himself when he defeats Goliath. He's doing it precisely because he has the experience of defending his flock from attacks of wolves and such.
yeah, and that has a precursor or it's more or less contemporary in the pagan. So like Plato talks about the ideal king or the ideal statesman as being a shepherd,
Right.
but then progresses to say, but that's not possible.
Wow, really?
Like in the Statesman, yeah, and then to say, but you know, it's really unrealistic, or
To have a
it's
shepherd
too
do that,
complicated of a problem. He can't shepherd each individual the way he would need to in
Right.
order to be efficacious. And so we have to have laws, and we have to have
Okay.
these, you know, and so it becomes a sort of averaged or utilitarian
Yeah.
sort of conception of rule in that discourse.
Wow.
But the beginning of the discourse is reducing the ideal king or the ideal statesman to a shepherd,
Wow.
like a shepherd of souls.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that actually makes good sense too. I'm thinking about two passages. One in which Paul calls us first of all, in Proverbs, when that famous parenting passage of spare the rod and hate the child.
Yeah.
Where clearly there's a rod in every parent's hand, like
Right.
the rod of rulership,
Right.
of
Scepter.
kingship, the
Yeah.
scepter. The scepter's in his hand.
Yeah.
And then it also, corresponds with being a nation of priests, which, in the ancient world, priests just were interchangeable with kings for the most part. I mean, you find that like Pseudo-Jerome talking all about how the idea of Messiah or Christ could either be translated as king or as priest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously you have the great connection between the gods, the god kings who are mediating for the country with the invisible gods,
Right.
Everything else as well. But that makes sense. It comes back to, I think, what we now, again, in a different space and time in the church history, call subsidiarity, but the fact that everybody has a scepter of a sort, to be able to rule and design their family and their life.
This seemed like the
And
shepherd.
the shepherd fits that.
Yeah,
he
I mean-
literally does have the crozier.
What do you think about it being announced to kings on the one hand and shepherds on the other, given the whole narrative of the Old Testament, in which the shepherd is the ideal king, and in which whenever they fail, like when David fails pretty dramatically by taking a census of his people, he, in confessing his sin, returns to the language of shepherding. He says, the fault is mine, but these sheep, my people, what have they done? So you can see that within the Davidic kingship, that you're kind of bound on the one hand by an image of the God who you're not supposed to be, and the shepherd who you are supposed to be. And then David's life is one of, being the shepherd and then failing and being like the God, and then moving back and forth between the shepherd and the God king. And it seems to me like when the good news is announced to, on the one hand, kings and on the one hand, shepherds, there is a this is a very, I'm just making this interpretation. So
I see what there's a literary, there's a literary device.
A literary device that seems to me to say that now this kingship, which was sort of encapsulated as preparatory, like we need to make this kind of king so that Jesus and being king is intelligible to the nations, well, and all this. But it also speaks of the universalization of the principle that in the same way that when we originally look at, well, where's the first kind of shepherding, we actually look at Adam, who's keeping in the garden, which is the verb for shepherding, that now this mode of kingship, this mode of rule is now possible, like you're saying, Jacob, I think, universally. Like it's, maybe it always was, it's just that it's now because Christ is making it not completely separating it from the amassing of wealth and power into a formal kingship. He's also opening it up where, well, now everyone has to use whatever power they have in a shepherd-like manner.
Right.
So now that image, which was the model for a divine or rather moral kingship, is now the image for all of us. We all have to ask if we're being a shepherd or a God king.
It's not just a sign; it's a symbol itself as well, because it's not just that he's coming literarily for these people; he's coming actually for these people, so that we might be these people.
Sure, yeah.
Come in and changed, and so as you say.
And so I think
That's
when
amazing.
the medieval tradition then looks at that and says, well, it's because they were rustics, it's because they were the poor, they're saying the same thing, which is that it's universal now, it's to everyone. But what I think maybe all we're adding to this is just that what's also universal now is the political theology.
It's kingship, yeah.
So kingship is now once again universalized precisely in the manner that retrospectively we say it was universalized before the fall, right? That Adam had the fullness of kingship, of being a priest, a prophet, and a king. That possibility is returned, and the way that we show that it's returned is we pick the bumpkins and we tell them to do the same thing that the actual kings are doing, namely go find the boy.
Right, exactly.
Oh, there goes the pipes.
It's okay.
Alex was anything else. Anyway, so that's go be a shepherd, I guess. What else? Anything else? Any gingerbread flavored takes from the Christmas narratives?
We were talking at our house the other night.
Oh, I've got one.
Oh, okay.
Before you talk about
All
your
right,
house.
that's fine. Yeah.
This one has. We're not going to talk more about it, but there's a medieval tradition that Mary circumcised Jesus.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like this weird one.
That is a weird one.
Yeah, it doesn't fit.
Nope.
I don't think it was true. It leads to a few really cool pieces of art, and then a totally
Really?
unique,
I want to see that.
totally unique allegory between Mary and Zipporah as the
right.
one who circumcises Moses.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, what are you
Moses' kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of maybe too intimate. I'm not sure. No, we were talking in our household the other night about the two types of wisdom, or like two. I mean, there's so many types of wisdom, you might say, but the two ways in which St. Thomas categorizes wisdom. On one hand, he categorizes.
You were
it
talking
as a
about that
gift.
with Blaze?
Well, he's
It's incredible.
He's a great listener.
Yeah.
Just,
I was listening. Yeah.
he was discoursing to you.
Yeah.
Sort of Jesus in the temple situation.
St. Thomas.
Yeah.
Anyways, you're talking about two kinds of
Dad.
wisdom.
Well, Heiss was saying it was an intellectual virtue, and he's like, no, he situates it in the, on the section on gift. And so we were having a father-son fight, and we finally realized that it was actually just two types of categories that wisdom finds itself both in. On the one hand, it's something that we can begin to discern, like what is the real cosmic order? How does everything actually fit in? And on the other hand, it's just something that you receive. It's like a theological virtue in that regard, where you can only but accept. And I think that the wise men, where we just kind of interject that word wise into the translation, represent that, because on the one side, they're discerning, they're able to find where the new king is to be born, but only can get so far. They need that revelation. They need wisdom as a gift as well, for them to be able to get all the way to him. So anyways, that's just a little.
Do you think they
Jingle Bell
received
hot take.
that gift when they were offering their gifts to the baby? I mean, do you think, because they go?
I'm referring to the scribes. Like
I get it. I get what you're
yeah.
saying, but that at that point, it's like their sort of pagan knowledge gets them so far, their wisdom, their worldly wisdom. Then there's revelation, that like the Jewish revelation is sort of the law that tells them legally where this is going to occur.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a revelation there, but that doesn't seem like the fullness of the gift. That's a precursor to the gift, isn't it? It's an anticipation of the gift.
Yeah.
Then they're at the cradle itself, offering their gifts to the baby, and then they go home by another way. And it's like you wondering if they're leaving having received the fullness of the gift of wisdom.
Right.
Right.
Going
Like,
by another way.
At that point, having worship to the God.
Did you just make that up?
I just did.
Nice. That seems totally true.
It seems like there's a sequence there.
Yeah, leave by another way definitely doesn't just
Don't
mean
come back by the same way. Don't go back the same way you came.
Right.
The same way you came is through worldly wisdom, and you're going to leave by a different way.
But that has to be true. I mean, the whole thing about how wisdom was with God from eternity,
Right.
and that wisdom is the one that descends and becomes incarnate.
Yeah. Right.
well, and to just bolster that by sort of plugging it into everything we were just discussing, they're going by another way is directly to avoid and trip up raging God King,
Exactly.
who's literally killing infants at this point, in order to make sure that he's the sole sovereign within his petty little regime.
His petty little servile regime.
I know that's the thing about Herod.
He
we always forget.
Himself is just a worthless little slave.
I know, like Caesar could just like replace him and often he has to like barter with Caesar. For his own. Like if you read the history of the Herods, I mean, it's pathetic. But it's like
Seriously.
But I think that's. I mean, sometimes there can be this moment of like, wait, are we like what if the interpretation is wrong because these in fact aren't. This isn't in fact a great king. He's obviously under. But I think that's actually it's more to the point that
How pitiful.
that's what human kingship actually looks like, is that it involves that. I mean, it's a lie. That's what I'm saying. Like that you can theoretically have some officially first. It's the emperor. But even that, it's not true that he has some kind of sole sovereign human power. That if you actually look into the lives of the emperors, it's this constant, sacrificing and trying to, play the political game to retain their power.
Right.
It's servile. It's servile from top to bottom. And so, like, there's a revelation in having Herod, who is such a
toady.
Yeah. So there's two. So it's like on the one hand, the narrative provides us with like Christ versus Caesar, which satisfies the whole very clean political theology. Yeah. But on the other hand, like when it gets down to it, he's fighting Herod. And that's like maybe a deeper revelation of what that actually what
Caesar's just a big Herod.
Yeah, exactly. Why do you think Jesus was born among animals? I've always wondered this, and since you don't have to have an answer. I've just been genuinely curious. It seems like significant
because the nativity scenes are awesome.
What else are we gonna like?
So the
whittle
kids,
out of wood,
the kids could
it's for the
play with
kids.
it, and then
it has
there's
to
a
be
donkey.
the new Adam.
Yeah. No, I
mean,
think that's right.
He's there again,
and that he brings the redemption that Christ brings is the redemption of the entirety of the creation.
Right.
Through redeeming man, he redeems all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the animals too are in on it.
Well, right, and you have the angels
And the angels and the whole cosmic hierarchy.
Wow.
even the fact that he's in the feeding trough, not only is that allusion to the Eucharist going ahead, but it's also even redeeming the things that we were supposed to raise up, the plants themselves.
My
It's a little ominous.
My wife
at the same
has a box of Christmas books that come out when we get into Advent. We start reading to try to get the kids excited for Christmas, and there's one of them that is really, really cheesy, but I really enjoy, which is, it's a story about the animals in the manger who like know that they somehow know that Mary's coming. And so they're preparing, in the stable, and they're preparing the manger, they're preparing the stable, and the animals are like, he's coming tonight. We have to like get this ready, and
That's
then,
awesome.
yeah. And I love it for just that reason. It's like, well, the animals are in on this too,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That satisfies.
It's very heartwarming.
That satisfies my desire for an answer on that one. Cosmic hierarchy, new Adam.
And there's just the direct poverty of it.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, sharing a dwelling with the animals.
Well, and the cool thing about talking about Christ is whenever you have some like literary question, like why did this happen? One of the answers is, well, it just did. It's history, man.
Yeah.
This isn't like a play.
It reminds me, and you know that scene in Brideshead Revisited where Charles is just sort of making fun of Christianity, and he's like bringing up Christmas, and he's like, oh, all that wise men and like the animals in the stable and all that kind of stuff. You don't actually believe all that. And then the response of, oh my goodness, what's his name? The main character. Anyway, the response of him is, well, yeah, I rather liked that part. I mean, and this is like when they're drinking and partying. It's the whole Oxford thing. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Of all the things about Christianity, like the one I believe most sort of obviously is the whole like nativity scene with the animals and the magi and all that, because that's awesome. Why in the world would you dispute that?
Yeah.
So my point is that it's just like on the face of it, it's just something that we all find attractive.
It's so shocking.
Right. I only asked the question because I first find it attractive, and then
yeah. Right.
Why do I find this attractive?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I never really I appreciate the war on Christmas.
Sebastian. His name is Sebastian.
Sebastian.
I'm sorry.
The
Go
drunk.
ahead. Yes. Go ahead.
I was just saying I don't appreciate the war on Christmas. I don't really think it's the war on Christmas that most people think. I think it's just in like the like German theologians,
Yeah.
They're like, oh, he was really born in a cave. Whatever, man.
Who cares? Could you even imagine being such like a Grinch? It's such like a curmudgeon that's something that you think you should bring up.
Oh, he wasn't born on this day. Whatever.
It's like, that was just like the solstice.
That census wasn't like the right census. It was really the other census.
Like, what? Oh my gosh.
Calm down. Eat a gingerbread.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Well, should we call it a day?
Sure.
I think this is coming out on the 4th day of Christmas. So everybody, happy 4th day of Christmas. Hope you're enjoying it with your family. Say a prayer for us.
We have a lot of toys to build before that.
Oh man,
and a lot of work to do.
Yeah,
you're gonna get arthritis in your little.
Oh my!
You're building You're building a dollhouse, right?
Oh yeah.
I am, and it is a major endeavor. So I was supposed to get a dollhouse because it was like, oh, she's of the right age, the daughter, and Sarah, my wife, was suggesting these like plastic things. Like what about this one? What about that one? And I'm like, no, how about this all wood Victorian 30-story beautiful? And then so I get it, and I'm starting to put it together, and it's like every shingle, every piece of molding.
You're actually building a house.
You're building the house, a little tiny house, and like my big clumsy hands, and it's like,
barely even do a big house.
Yeah, painting each individual little piece, and then holding it, gluing it together. Oh yeah, you build these little houses. But it's opulent.
Does it have quarter round around the floors?
No.
Okay.
Although you could. I mean, you
don't have to do that.
Options are incredible.
Yeah.
I think it says something about the difference between you and I, that I found a dollhouse that was being thrown out in the trash and just took
snagged that. It's like, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I wish I had done that.
I know. Well, you got to.
No, I mean, this will be great.
It will.
And this will be great when it's done, but I have many hours of work yet ahead of me. And 2 days.
I'm building my son.
Oh my gosh, 2 days. We have 2 days.
Is it 2 days or 3? Whatever.
Oh, wow.
My kids had a big discourse about this today, about how many days it is. Depends on, do you count today? Do you count Christmas itself?
Oh, yeah.
Actually,
it was interesting because in one of the antiphons this morning, it was, do not be anxious. Your Lord will come in 5 days. And I was like, whoa, wait, I think he comes sooner than that, actually.
Well, he'll come then too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Anyway, this will all have already happened by the time people are listening to this.
That's right.
Well,
I'm building a bat cave out of a cardboard box for my son.
is it a bat cave like Felix
Batman?
is Batman?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I thought you meant
Well,
a
technically
bat
he's
cave.
Robin, though he has some
Are you Batman?
sometimes.
Cool.
It's
Do you have a mask?
it's a little
or
bit fluid.
costume?
I don't. It's more of an identity.
It's cool.
I have a small family, so right now it's like Batgirl, Batman, Robin, and Bat Baby make up our house.
Okay.
Yeah. Be careful what you read.
Yeah.
You might become it.
That's awesome. All right.
Okay.
Awesome. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Bye bye.